Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second webinar for the RARE 2030 project and the panel of experts. Thank you for all of those who joined us for the first webinar. For those of you who weren't able to join, we have a recording, so if you haven't had the link sent yet, please let us know and we'll be happy to share that with you. Just a few housekeeping announcements from my colleague in terms of the question and answer session and any other details about how to participate in the webinar.
Thank you, Anna. So hi all, this is Davor from Eurodis, and you will see that you have your video turned off and your sound turned off. It's going to be a large group. There's almost 50 participants now, so welcome all. You will obviously have the opportunity to ask questions. Please use the Q&A box instead of a chat box for asking questions, because due to different versions of Zoom, some of you may be using, there may be times where people can't see the chat box, so please use Q&A box. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Davor. So I will now share my screen. Does that look all right? Okay. So welcome again. As Davor mentioned, we have up to 60 participants on the call now, so quite a large portion of our panel of experts. I'm going to start by introducing everyone who's on the call. My colleague Jan Lecam from Eurodis will be joining us at the end of the webinar, but I will begin with an introduction of the project, a quick overview for those who are just joining for the first time, as well as a repetition kind of explaining the overall flow, the importance, the impact, etc. Then I have my colleague Giovanna Giuffre from ECNova, an expert on foresight methods. Victoria Headley from the University of Newcastle, who will really be your main interlocutor for the work that you do throughout this year, coming up with trends in the field of rare disease policy, as well as Charlotte Rodwell from Orphanet, who has led the work on all of the data collection to create a knowledge base so that all of the conversations you have around identifying trends start from a common ground. So again, I'll go over the overview of the project. Victoria and Charlotte will let you know how they've created a knowledge base to help you identify trends throughout the year. And then Giovanna will finish off by describing how we continue to find those trends, not only in literature that's specific to rare diseases, but in other foresight studies that cover peripheral topics like personalized medicine and data and governance in general, and how those relate to rare diseases, and maybe give you a bit of a clue as to how those will then translate into these future scenarios that will feed into recommendations for future governance. So what is RARE 2030? Well, it's a 2-year project, and the basic objective we have made for ourselves is that although we can't predict the future in terms of the political, technological, environmental, social, legal aspects of our world that might influence rare disease policy, we can certainly prepare for it. And so we have an opportunity to work together over these 2 years to identify what the most relevant trends may be, especially those that are less certain than others, to create what our ideal or possible scenarios would be given those trends, to choose those that are most ideal, and then to create recommendations that will lead to those preferred scenarios. We are fortunate enough to have this project start at what I call a pivotal moment in rare disease history, because we are at the end of two really major platforms that served as a channel of communication between the European Commission, the member states, and many stakeholders in the field, and those are the Expert Group on Rare Diseases and RD Action, the Joint Action for Rare Diseases. We also have a quite outdated, if you will, policy framework in terms of the 2008 and 2009 Commission communication and Council recommendations around rare diseases. We have an entirely new Parliament and therefore soon to be new Commission. We have this very rapidly changing landscape that I mentioned before, and an opportunity really for Europe to plug into what has become quite a global effort in making sure that rare diseases are coordinated in an international way, and that really this population of 30 million people in Europe can serve as an opportunity to achieve some of the greater development goals, which include health, but other aspects from an international point of view. So again, it's a project that's supported by the Parliament and for which recommendations that are going to be coming out of it will be presented directly to this captive audience at the end of 2020. We have an opportunity to support member states through a number of activities that I'll describe further in the presentation, and make sure that the recommendations we put forward are not only relevant to the national situations, but that they are taken up or bought into in some way. And again, this idea that Europe has an opportunity to contribute to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So how will it work? We have four major stages of a foresight study. It begins, of course, with the creation of this group of experts, which will serve as the central consultative body during the project. And now that that is more or less established, we can start sharing the other pieces of work with you. So as I mentioned, Orphanet has been leading the effort in creating a knowledge base. So reviewing and consolidating everything that has been done in the field to date, and through that identifying the emerging issues, trends, and drivers that may help to shape the future. So we're somewhere between steps 1 and 2 right now. You will all recall that in November, we've asked you to save the date for a face-to-face meeting, in which case we'll convene and summarize all of the work that this group will have done virtually over the next few months to agree on the trends and drivers and to prioritize them. And after that stage, the way that these trends are prioritized will then allow us to conceive of potential futures. If we prioritize one trend over another, we might have one future reality. If we prioritize another, the future might look a little bit different. And once again, using those scenarios that we collectively agree are preferred, and there may be a few, then backcasting into actual policy options and ultimately recommendations that are passed on to the authorities. So who is involved? Certainly patients. Obviously, Eurydice leading the project, we are conscious of making sure that patients are always central to the conversation. So our very first step in the knowledge base and identification of trends process started with a workshop during our annual membership meeting in Bucharest earlier this month, where we convened roughly 50 patient representatives and started to really get a feedback of whether the process that we're using makes sense, whether the knowledge base that we're creating covers all of the important aspects per topic, and starting to identify trends that from their point of view are the most relevant and important and perhaps unknown. So you'll hear a bit more from Giovanna about the trends that were identified during those workshops and trends that have been identified in her own literature review. We have then these are roughly the categories, if you will, of participants that have been invited to join. I think what's important to note is that the categories span as exhaustively as we could have all of the potential stakeholders involved in decision making for better management, care, treatment, quality of life for people living with rare diseases. But what's not on this slide is perhaps the geographical element. So we're also very conscious of the fact that they represent all countries in Europe and actually go beyond to a number of international members. And Vicky will go through in greater detail what our group or who it's comprised of today. We will also include the input from citizens. So I think this is something new, certainly for Eurydice, and perhaps new to many of you. In a society that has increasingly limited budgets and resources to spend on any one health effort and health perhaps in general, we thought it would be important to have a point of view from the general public, so to speak, on how they feel this cause falls in relation to other priorities in our future. And so hopefully appropriately, we decided to focus on young citizens, given that those will be the future actors of policymaking. And when I say young citizens, more specifically, we will be inviting young students in public policy, in public health, in medicine, in social work, in research, to represent the next generation of decision makers. So that input will come in the form of a citizen conference, which will take place in the summer of 2020. Of course, all of these consultative bodies are selected, built with the contribution of the project partners, so you'll see them listed here. Most of them are on the call today, although we have 2 European reference networks that are also members of our project, and the Imperial College of London business unit, who is doing a piece of work on the future expenditure and access of orphan drugs. We have one more consultative body, if you will, and this group is really serving as a sounding board for the project partners and the panel of experts to ensure 3 things. One, that the proposals coming, first of all, that the methodology that we're using is as high of quality as possible. So we have a few experts in foresight in general, a few of which have specific experience in rare diseases and orphan drugs. We have a number of representatives here from the perspective of public health, because we are ultimately trying to come up with public health recommendations, of course. We have a few representatives or former representatives of Directorate Generals, which understand the context in which we were going to be putting forward these recommendations, and a few experts that are very specific to the cause of rare diseases. And their role, as I said, will be quite advisory, helping us complement membership of the panel of experts, helping us review the evaluation process of the project, being interviewed in a more qualitative way, and yes, really just acting as a sounding board throughout the process. So the events that I mentioned, Vicky will be going through with you the virtual work that you'll be doing in the next 7 months. But in addition to that work, we also have a few face-to-face events where we'll be meeting together. So I mentioned the previous Bucharest meeting with the membership of Eurydice happening in May. Our panel of experts will all be convening, or those of you who can, on the 7th of November in Brussels, and you will be receiving formal invitations for those very soon. the next opportunity for us to convene face-to-face will be the European Conference on Rare Diseases in Stockholm, and that's the 15th and 16th of May. We have not specified a date for the Young Citizen Conference, of which you will be all welcome to join, but that will be happening in the summer of 2020. And then we have a number of regional workshops that we are organizing aligned with the upcoming EU presidencies throughout, probably even before May of 2020 through November of 2020, again, to make sure that the scenarios, first of all, the policy options, and then finally the recommendations we put forward take into account the national realities. And finally, at the end of the project, I've put December here, but the date is not confirmed yet either, we will be formally presenting the recommendations to at the Parliament, and there again, you will all be invited individually to join. So I think I will stop there and let Vicky take the floor now.
Okay, so I'm just going to share a screen if this works. Can you all hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. And Anna, you can see the screens? Yeah. Okay, perfect. So, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining our second webinar. I know the numbers of people on the call have gone up quite a lot, actually, the last few minutes, so you'll have been hopefully able to join some of Anna's introduction, which just refreshes what the project's all about. I'm going to talk to you a bit about a particular work package, which is the one in which you're all going to be operating for the rest of this year. So this is work package 4. You don't need to know the numbers, but this is essentially about building or at least consolidating our knowledge base. So we've got a number of partners are participating, but actually, because it's a fairly small project in terms of full partners, a massive project in terms of wider collaborators, fairly small with partners, so they're all pretty much getting involved with all the activities, to be honest, which is really helpful. So what we're doing in this work package is we are trying to establish, or at least clarify, what is the status quo of rare disease activities, thinking really broadly in European countries. And we're using this to try to stimulate discussions and build consensus on what are some of the trends and what are some of the drivers of change which will impact on health and well-being for rare diseases. So we are, well, those of you who joined the call last time, you'll have heard a little bit more information about the different ways in which we're getting this information, namely the resource on the state-of-the-art of rare disease activities in Europe, then the literature review, and the broader horizon scanning. And I'll say a little bit more about these in a moment, but not much, because you can pretty much look on the last recording and get up to speed on what's happening in these. What's important for all of you to know is what you're going to receive to work with and to stimulate your ideas and discussions. So I'll just give you a really brief update on this very big panel of experts. This information was painstakingly put together by me this morning, so it's very fresh, but it will change actually, because as you might imagine, this is a fairly huge enterprise, and so a lot of colleagues have been working on this, and I have to thank Anna and also Kasia, particularly, who've been helping to send out the invitations and to track the changes and people recommending other experts. But so far, we have 142 acceptees, which is fantastic, actually. There are still a few people that we haven't had any response from, and largely that happens, I think, when mails go into spam boxes. So we're all chasing up the people who haven't replied to find out if you definitely don't want to be involved or if you actually do want to be involved. And again, that takes some time. So I know a few of you will have been sending emails either to the Rare 2030 inbox or to my inbox, and some of you have already started sending really valuable thoughts and ideas on this quite complicated topic. They're really appreciated. We are logging all of them. I'm sorry if I'm a little bit late in coming back to people sometimes. It's just because, you know, we sent out over 200 invitations, so there's lots and lots of messages coming back. But we're getting there. So thank you for your patience. It'll become a lot more streamlined very soon once we get everybody sorted into their smaller subgroups. So this is just a table showing roughly some of our main categories of stakeholders. So our biggest groups are the patient advocates, and this encompasses a lot of people, lots of different subgroups. You remember on the slides we showed last time that we broke down by each broad group of stakeholder. There are lots of different subgroups. So under this first category, we would have the Council of National Alliances, we'd have Council of European Federations, we have EPAGs from the ERNs. We also approach some young people advisory groups outside of rare diseases. So this exercise, to be honest, is a little bit artificial because some people, and in fact many of you on the call, could very legitimately go into lots and lots of these categories. So it's not perfect, but it's just to show that we're trying to do our best to make this, you know, not just healthcare professionals, not just researchers, not just patients, a good mixture. So we've got lots of patient advocates. We're doing pretty well on the national, regional competent authority side. So that's people in board of member states of ERNs. It's people who were and still are in many cases looking after rare disease policies in their countries, people who are in the expert groups. We're doing really well on the ERN front. In fact, most of the ERN sort of healthcare representatives are in fact the coordinators. In one or two cases, they've delegated to others in their coordination teams. Good showing from regulators, from pharmaceutical industry. And although some of these categories down here are a little bit lower, I think the expertise that the people can bring is really, really strong. So we have a good mixture. We're struggling a little bit. We need a few more representatives from basic researchers from other fields, essentially. So Jean-Michel Head, who works with Maurizio Scarpa on the metaburn, has always been very, very insistent that we need to try to bring in real basic researchers as well as representatives from the big research infrastructures, which is a great point. And ideally to bring in some real stars from external communities like, I don't know, cancer, pediatrics, immunology. So people who will have a knowledge of rare diseases, but they're not traditional rare disease people. And we are doing our best there, but actually it's quite difficult to get some of those people on board. So we will keep going. And maybe come back to Jean-Michel for some more suggestions and more ideas to help with that, actually. So I'll go through this a little bit faster. This is a very rough breakdown by country. And again, this will change, not hugely in some cases. So the good news is I think we have representatives from all of the EU member states. We are funded by European money, so we're focused on European countries, but we are, you can see in the blue box at the top, we have very much invited experts and stakeholders from beyond Europe as well, whether it's still within Europe or actually much more globally. So we're hoping to get some more responses there. But the table shows you how many we have at the moment confirmed yeses from each of the countries. And then the other column shows how many additional people we invited. So sometimes we maybe only have, say, 1 or 2 people, but it may be that we actually invited a few more and we're still waiting for responses from them. So hopefully some of these numbers will go up. Unsurprisingly, we have lots from, let's have a look, I think Netherlands is in the lead, if you like. Italy, Germany, France, Belgium, UK are all very high as well. We really want to try and get some of those lower numbers up a little bit better. We're never going to have a perfect balance in this sort of a panel. It just doesn't happen if you try to engineer it, but we're doing the best that we can to be more inclusive and more representative. You will all hopefully by now have received a little link to go to an online form and to register your subgroup preferences, and that's because this big group, which will be 150 plus, it's too big, as you can see from these calls, to really meet and have you know, discussions where we can unmute you and have people sharing your perspectives. So you've been signing up for these subgroups. We will kind of close these next week. We'll still take a few, you know, latecomers, of course, but essentially what we need to do is to kind of publish the lists of who's in which subgroup. And basically you have all been allocated to your top 3 subgroups, the ones that you chose. So you can see down here what the topics were. And from the previous slide set last time, you can see exactly what's kind of classed. Again, it's a little bit approximate, but what's classed under each heading. So the really big ones are the national frameworks or the national plans and strategies group. the Accessing Healthcare group, which includes ERNs. And again, ERNs can kind of cut across, but particularly on that healthcare inequality side, we put them mainly in this category. So those are the biggest. So for those two, we may actually have to split those groups and actually do 2 calls, because again, 64 people, even if not everyone can dial in, that's still quite a big group. So this is how we're developing. And of course, you'll have all of these slides so you can have a look at this information in more detail. This just shows in a pie chart form the same information. And it's really just there to say, yes, we've got these 2 big groups at the top, which is the Accessing Healthcare and the National Plans and Strategies. But actually, luckily, we haven't come up with any, drastic, there are no groups basically where there was very little interest. It's reasonably evenly spread across the rest. So that is great. So again, you saw this slide last time. This is just to remind you of the 3 main sources of the information that we're trying to put together for you. Because of course, you all want to know what you're going to actually be doing and what you're going to be working with. So some of the information to populate what we're calling these knowledge-based summaries, documents. Some of the information, some of the data to populate these is coming from the update that I'm doing for the European state-of-the-art resource. And as I said to latecomers, you can check out last time's video and find out more about that. The middle thing is the literature review, which Charlotte's team at INSERM is leading on. And this is really scanning rare disease publications. I'll ask Charlotte to say a little bit about this in a few minutes. And then really importantly, we have the broader horizon scanning in the truest sense of the word, which means not just looking at publications, reports which are focused on rare diseases, but really looking at what else is happening in other fields across the world. And some of this I think is going to make a lot more sense after Giovanna's presentation later, because she's going to make it a little bit more tangible and real for us. But this is the really important part. When you join these calls and when you start working in these subgroups, don't be constrained to key questions that we're asking you or to the material that we're presenting you with. It's really important that you bring what they call blue sky thinking, and you reach outside of what we're giving you and think about other trends, other drivers of change that you think will impact our community. So what you're going to get from us in each of your subgroups will be what we're calling knowledge-based summaries. This is just a rough kind of schema of what these might look like. There'll be 1 for each subgroup, and actually for 1 or 2 subgroups, you'll probably get 2 of these because some of the topics were really so massive. We didn't want to give people long documents. So none of these should be any longer than 8 pages, absolute max, and we'll do our best to drill them down. But the idea is that they're going to present in a consolidated way the results of all of those 3 different sources of information gathering and analysis that I just discussed. It's a way for you to get that status quo as best as we can reconstruct it without having to do loads of reading around and research all the publications yourself. So each of these knowledge-based summary documents is going to have a mixture of writing and a mixture of graphs and visuals, and they'll all have the same sort of structure. So they'll all start with a brief explanation of the topic and what we mean by it. They're not going to be hugely descriptive because there are other resources, other reports out there, but we just want to highlight where in the policy base this topic came from. So what's mentioned about it in the Commission communication, in the Council recommendation. Then we're going to have a section describing, each one will be slightly different, but more or less we'll have a section on the current situation, on the status quo. So thinking outside of disease areas, thinking across rare diseases generally, what's happening with this topic? And here, I'm going to use the most up-to-date data from the state-of-the-art resource that I can possibly find. And I'll show you an example of this very quickly in a second. Then we're going to have the results of the literature review, which Charlotte's team at INSERM has been leading on. And again, we'll show you some snapshots of the kind of text and material that you can expect. So this is a very, very rough one. And this is where everyone says, oh my gosh, that's not correct for my country. It's out of date. I will have a caveat that the information for these kinds of graphs and charts, as I say, it comes from the state-of-the-art resource, and those of you involved in contributing that data will know that that's still in flux. So countries are doing their best to get updated information to me within the next week, but sometimes it takes a bit longer, and I'm very conscious that you are asked to provide a lot of information in there, or at least a little bit of information, but across quite a lot of topics. So at the moment, this is for the national plans and strategies topic, the sorts of graphic that you'll receive, but it'll be updated slightly before you receive it. So it just shows what kind of status quo our plans and strategies are at, which countries have plans, what kind of, are they still in date? Because for quite a few countries, these have now expired. Then there'll be little graphics about what we think are relevant facts. And it's not just what we think are relevant facts. So those of you familiar with the USED, the European Union Committee of Experts on Rare Diseases, will know that, for instance, for this topic, there was a very important set of recommendations which Domenica Teruscio and Jan Le Cam were really involved in our old joint action. And these were indicators around helping countries to construct national plans and strategies and to implement them. So one of the things that we wanted to know, which all the member states agreed to collect actually, is the extent to which these plans and strategies are being implemented. And an important part of that is actually, is there a dedicated body or group that is tasked with following up on the plan, on monitoring it, on evaluating it? And if there is it actually working in reality? Does it involve patients, or is it just politicians, just doctors? So all these sorts of things will be presented. We'll have sections with graphics on trends. So this is a really nice graphic that Charlotte has created. And again, we might change it just slightly before we send it to all of you. But this just shows, it's a good way of showing trends over the last, well, nearly 20 years of our kind of watershed moments in policy adoption in Europe, and also, of course, in the national frameworks. So this is the kind of information you'll receive, and then you'll also get some writing. So this is not a nice slide, but it's very important work. And this is a little bit of a snapshot of some of the results of the vast literature review that Charlotte has been doing. So maybe, Charlotte, I don't know if you just want to say a few words about how you've been doing the literature review and how, you know, what we're looking at on the screen, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Hello, everybody. So in the last webinar, we really described in detail how we were sourcing the different publications that are going into this part of the document. Essentially, we're using the archives of Orphan News International, our twice-monthly newsletter, which is produced via a wide literature review, PubMed searches and Google searches in order to source interesting publications on each of the themes. We choose the most pertinent, we provide in quite a large table of references, and then for the fact sheet we're really drilling down to find the different trends observed over times and important themes within the theme, and we provide in the fact sheet itself just quite a short list of references, but you can always access the full document if you want to go further. So this is a synthesis of what has been observed in the literature over the past 10 years that you can see. Thanks, Vicky.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. So just again, a snapshot of what these look like, but the key bit is this point in pink down here, which is that these documents, we sort of changed a bit from, we sometimes call them knowledge-based fact sheets. We're starting to call them more summaries because they're not really single sheets. They're now multiple pages long, given the breadth of the topics. They're not static documents that we're just going to use for the teleconferences and then forget about. So we want to evolve them and grow them. We haven't figured out exactly what our final product looks like. I think it would be good to get your thoughts on how best we can develop these. But I can give you an idea in this next slide, which looks scary, but actually is just a schema. So you can have some idea of what to expect over the next few months. So if we go to the top left, where we have the pink boxes, now the good news is the pink things are largely done, and the bad news is we've got lots still to do in the blue boxes. But the good news is it's all exciting, so I hope you're enthused about it. So if anyone still does need to select their subgroups, then we need you to do that as soon as possible so we can provisionally close those. And as I've mentioned, you're automatically enrolled to your top 3. If you've changed your mind since on some of these, then you can let me know when you get the email invitation, that's fine. There's been a few questions earlier when Anna was presenting about whether we're going to make those lists available. So we will. We'll create one master membership list for the full panel. And again, if we did that today, it would be changing a little bit, but I think we're at the point where we're not going to grow too much more, so we need to get something out there. But we'll also create membership lists for each of those 8 subgroups. The plan, unless people think that's not a good idea, would be to put this somewhere central, so on the Rare 2030 website, so it gives visibility to the work you're all doing. But of course, this will not include any contact details. So I think it would simply be the name. It would probably be the broad stakeholder category that you're most connected with. And again, for some of you, you'd be able to join many of these. And also the country that the person's from, because a few of you have asked, you know, who else is involved from your country. We'll talk about this a little bit more internally. It may be that actually we do something first via, I don't know, a Google folder where you can access all this, but we'll put it somewhere for sure where all of you in this panel at least are able to see who's involved in each subgroup and from which countries. So those membership lists are going to be created next week. That's the week commencing the 3rd of the 6th, in case you can't decipher the code in the yellow box. And in the same week, next week, you will all receive doodle polls. And these will be circulated to allow us to arrange 2 teleconferences for each subgroup. So doing the maths, if you stick with your 3, then you will be invited to 6 teleconferences over the next couple of months. Doodle polls, I know it's not the most fun thing to complete. We'll try to keep them reasonably manageable, but we didn't want to just select dates because really we want to go for the most democratic way to pick slots that we can all make. I'll go back to something in a second because I know not everyone will be able to join every single time. So we will very quickly select the most popular dates, and if I can just move the little thing, okay. We'll very quickly select the most popular dates, and then we will send you calendar invitations for those teleconferences for your subgroups on the 10th of June, or by the 10th of June at the latest, maybe a little bit before. So you will have the dates in your diaries. Now, 1 week before each of your calls, you will receive our knowledge base summary. It may not be a perfectly polished, closed, static document. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, the idea is that these documents will develop a little bit based upon your input, but it'll be something which will give you a really good synthesis of the materials that we've brought together for your consideration. At the same time as you receive that, you'll also receive a link to a shared Google Doc, again for your particular subgroup. And that will be a place for you to, if you're really keen, to start putting down some thoughts and suggestions and some comments, even ahead of the call, which we can kind of have a look at in advance and I can bring to those teleconferences. But that's also a really good way for people who are not able to join perhaps one of these teleconferences, that you can still provide your feedback. You can still essentially give your answers to what we're going to be discussing on that first teleconference altogether. So the first teleconferences, the aim is to have all of these first ones take place somewhere between the 17th and the 30th of June. We have really tight timelines in this project, so we only have 2 years in total, and there's a lot to accomplish. And the big date, or the first big date that we're working towards, is the November face-to-face meeting, which Anna mentioned. So to have what we need to have ready for that, to make the best use of having you all there, we need to try to, basically we can't take the summer off, is what we're saying. However, we understand that August is the most popular month. I know different countries do things at slightly different times, but August seems to be the month when those who can down tools and have a much earned break. So we won't schedule any teleconferences in August, but we will need to use as much of June as we can, avoiding 1 or 2 big meetings that I know are coming up. And we'll also need to use as much of July as we can as well. If we have to, then particularly some of the second calls, we can go into the very beginning of September, but we're going to aim to be really ambitious and try to do them all before people go off for their August break. So when you join those teleconferences, those who are able to join, and hopefully that's most of you, we roughly want you to do 2 things. One will be to discuss some key questions related to your knowledge-based summary. So if it's the national plans and strategies, the national framework subgroup, for instance, one of the key questions could be something broad like, do we need a new EU policy framework and action plan for rare disease national plans? Do we need any more European level support? How appropriate do we think the new policy making platforms, so things like the steering group for prevention and promotion, expert group on health information, how appropriate is our existing environment to help us advance on this topic? So we do want to stimulate some fairly detailed discussion on your topic, but that will lead us into our second point, where we really want people to try to identify the major changes that you perceive in this area as far as possible over the last, say, 20 years. So really, what are the trends that you've detected looking back to say the year 2000? And the Google Docs we're going to give you will have a nice table where you don't have to write loads and loads and loads. You can simply start to brainstorm some of the big changes that you've perceived around these different topics. After we've had the first teleconference, you can continue to add to this same Google document if people have inspired you and it started your brain working. And then when we join our second call, rather than looking at the past and looking at the status quo where we are, we're going to look much more towards the future. So here we are going to be guided a lot by our colleagues at ISANOVA, so Giovanna and also Svetlana, who will be helping us to start, or at least facilitating discussions on what do you think are going to be the major trends in these areas particularly, but also bringing in some broader blue sky thinking across the next 20 years or so. So that's roughly how the calls are going to work. What will we come out with across the two? We'll come out with a mixture. So even those key questions that I just showed you there is going to probably give you the idea that we're going to generate lots and lots of different types of really good perspectives and analyses and suggestions. So we're going to have some answers and some thoughts, really useful thoughts, which might be quite specific to each of these subtopics. So you might have some specific thoughts on, where we need to go next for registries. You might have specific thoughts on newborn screening or diagnostics. So we might come up with some really useful things there. At the same time, we're going to be gathering some hopefully quite concise views on what do you think are the most important changes in these areas across the past 20 years, and what kind of changes are they? Were they political? Were they economic? Were they technological? And at the same time, on our second call, you're going to be looking towards the future and hopefully coming up with some possible trends. So there's lots of different ideas and types of information going into these teleconferences, which I think is going to be really exciting. And we can almost see two parallel but very closely complementary types of output, so at least at the moment. So on the one hand, what we really want to emerge with, or what Giovanna needs us to emerge with, for each of these subgroups is a very short, maybe one-page document which just summarizes the possible trends that you've come up with for each of these areas. Loosely, there'll be some trends which run across areas, and again, I think Giovanna will explain this a little bit better. At the same time, I think we will be identifying perhaps gaps where we don't have suitable recommendations at European or regional level, or where we do have recommendations, we do have guidance, but actually it's no longer fit for purpose, that the world has moved on in the last 10 years. Possible areas for collaborative action. So who knows, this is just a screenshot showing some of the recommendations that were issued in the past. And it may be that this panel finds scope to try to develop, maybe through another forum, but to develop guidance on some of the untapped areas, or even perhaps to lay out a roadmap to lead us to a new round of policy recommendations or commission communications for rare diseases. We don't have a determined endpoint in mind in this project. It really is up to all of you in our panel to help us to decide what is the best kind of output for this field. So I'm going to end there because I think when we're talking about trends, we're talking about drivers of change. This can still be quite a tricky concept because I guess pretty much everyone on this call is an expert in rare diseases and we know our field, but not many of us are experts in foresight methodology. And not many of us know tangibly what we mean by these different terms like policy scenarios, like drivers of change. So I'm going to hand over to Giovanna, who is going to give us something a little bit more concrete to help to square that circle. So I'll stop sharing.
Hello, good morning. I will start sharing my screen. I think now it's okay. Yes, thank you, Anna, and thank you, Vicky, for this introduction to the horizon scanning that I think is the most mysterious subject of this call. And I am to do really a short introduction, 20 minutes, around terms, ideas, and questions that we would like to discuss with you in this call. The assumption for any foresight exercise is that the future will be different from today. And the question that will be leading us on this strategic conversation is really about looking at the future, identifying trend, drivers, and weak signal that you think will influence rare disease diagnosis, treatment, and care the most. Identify why, which are the cause of this change. As was mentioned by Anna, one of the main scope will be identifying this trend in order to build scenarios and identifying possible future. There is just not one future, but more than one are possible. And also start drafting policy recommendation in order to starting moving towards the preferred future. One of the main features of this exercise is also to build consensus among different stakeholders with different background and different skills. So I think the presentation done by Vicky helped us to see how much is important to take into consideration, take on board on the skills and the different territorial level. I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, few idea about the process. What we are working on is a report on determinant of health and driver of change for rare disease that will be to European Commission by October. This deliverable will include the input, ideas, and brainstorming that we'll be able to receive during this call with you. There are other components that and other ideas that will be included, and they will come mainly from the workshop that was mentioned by Anna that we just held in Bucharest with patients representative. Plus, there will be also the idea coming from interview with the Research Advisory Board, and will complement these participatory activities, also a literature review on research on rare disease, made especially by INSERM, while us at ISINNOVA, we have a background on foresight. We will look especially at documents related with healthcare. Different components that will help us to identify and spot trends, change, opportunities, and challenge for the future. Here's some definition, what we meant by when we speak about trends and driver. This is a standard definition. A trend is defined as tendency or a direction for the future over time. A trend may be strong, weak, increasing, decreasing, or stable. At the same time, different from projection, we don't consider that a trend that have been increasing in the past will continue in the future. We can also imagine that a trend that have something that have consistent as change in a consistent way in the past will be completely different in the future. If we can have an example on, and was raised in the Bucharest workshop about rare disease, is personalized medicine. How is evolving? How can impact the treatment and cure of rare disease? When we speak about, sorry, Oop. No. When we speak about drivers, is what is causing change, affecting or shaping the future. A trend. So if we look at personalized medicine, the list of personalized medicine is the data opportunities arising from genome sequencing. And finally, if we speak about seed of change, these are considered the early sign of possible but not confirmed change. That in the later time, in 10 or 20 years, you as an expert consider as an indication of a trends, a development, opportunities, or also a challenge that could arise. So in the field also of personalized medicine and genome sequencing, we can consider, for example, the use of artificial intelligence for reading data analysis and diagnosis as a seed of change. This is I will not expect you to read this complex table, and this very preliminary table that we start filling with the trends that could be important for rare disease. These are findings coming out from a literature review on foresight exercise related with healthcare. So are broader, let's say, than the field of rare diseases specifically, but we have tried to select important for the impact that they will have in rare disease. What we aim to discuss with you is which are other trends we should consider, which implication do you see or foresee of this trend in the field of rare disease, and how we should refine, review, and fine-tune what we found at the moment in the literature review with your expertise. So from July on, we will ask you to look at the future, at the next 10, 20 years, really to try to spot those trends that you believe will be the most important and for impact and also for uncertainty, because it's not sure what will happen and who will be able to influence the trends that we see at the moment. For this presentation that has a limited time, I just would like to discuss and present briefly with you 4 of this trend that we have found in the literature review, but we have also discussed with patients' representatives. We would like just to give, let's say, an idea of what a trend could look. All foresight exercise related with healthcare start with this, let's say, consolidated trend that is about the expected rise on expenditure on healthcare sector. What we see is that healthcare expenditure is expected to rise more than annual rate of GDP. So these are projections, but could give us an idea of a system that is currently under pressure and need to reform. Which are the drivers of these trends are for sure the aging population is on one hand the rise of chronic disease, but also the advent of new therapy and technology. If we look at studies, it's sure that there is also a mismanagement in the health form and improve in order to keep equity and accessibility. How this could impact also the rare disease community? What are the pressure that the community are currently perceiving, and how this can contribute to these are the kind of discussion we would like to have with you in the second call of this exercise. There are two strictly connected by the European Commission that there will be a shortage of medical workers. So these are numbers, but we perceive that there is an increased need of profession in medical care and medical workers. And there is also the increased need of different skills. So multidisciplinarity, the ability of a health professional of working in team with bioscientists and technologists is a needs that is perceived as increasing. At the Bucharest workshop emerged also the role and the importance of social care, for example, and the integration of healthcare and social care. So what is happening? Who owns the knowledge? Who is able to prepare? How we can influence also the kind of educational skill needed in the environment of healthcare professional. This is another two trends. So in one hand, the shortage of medical workers, on the other hand, the increased need of multidisciplinary skills. And then this is a very, this is a macro trends that for sure we will go into details and present in more detailed way, because the answer to that some systems are giving to the pressure, economic pressure, is the changing of healthcare system towards a more predictive, preventive, and personalized and participatory medicine. What does it mean? How does decline to rare disease? What kind of impact could have to the rare disease community, but at the same time, what kind of lesson learned by the rare disease community could accelerate this change? There is really a lot of technological and as well as managing a practice that are currently implemented in some countries that if extended, upscaled, and in different contexts could change the way of healthcare system is organized. Some of this change could be very relevant for rare disease community. So in one hand, we have telemedicine, but we have also hospital redesign, precision medicine. And so we would like to discuss with you with kind of technologies and with kind of practice you think could be most important for the future of rare disease. Finally, and these are the start, let's say, of many kind of technological revolution, is big data and health data registry. Who will own the data? How this is collected, shared, open or closed? How we can imagine governance of data that is different from today? What kind of recommendation we can imagine to have a more European or open kind of governance of data? I imagine each one of you must be expert in a field that is related to a trend. So what we would like to discuss with you in this conversation is how we can fine-tune and write a trend that are interesting for rare disease community and also connected with this macro trend that are currently under study and discussed on a broader view of the healthcare sector. So this is why we need you, to identify trends, identify emerging technology and social practice. Some tips about thinking about the future. There is no one right answer. So there is, it's important to think to drivers. It's important to look at the past of what has happened and what have been the drivers of important change, and also to combine drivers in order to imagine trends. So it's a collective brainstorming that should help us to have a consensus and draft something that is really important for at the European level. This project is at the European level, so among different local contexts is important across discipline and across sector in order to build scenarios that are owned by you participating in this process. Some common mistake is really just to look for number and extrapolating. So we can use, and it's very important to think about indicators of change, but then we can also question what will happen might be different than what has happened in the past. And also about thinking that there is one right future. First, there are many possibilities, and there is also the possibility that the future will be different in different scale or situation. Finally, I'm not lucky with this. This is a quote by Jan Morrison, and I think that I found it in different foresight exercise. We are often focused by looking at the short-term change that are often overestimate, and sometimes we forget to look at the future and the effect of long-term change. So for this time, for this call, we will really invite you to stop about your current activities and your policy priority, and really to try to have a leap on the next 10 years to identify challenge and opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Giovanna. So I will now share my screen again. So Vicky, thank you for going over the process. I see in the question box that we don't have many specific questions as to the process of our work in the next few months. So I take that as a good sign. But of course, if you have any, then we welcome you to chat them in now or to send them to us directly. And then in terms of the overall foresight process and the emergence of a few of the trends that we already have witnessed in our first workshop and in the general literature review and other foresight studies, hopefully this will inspire you to get the idea of what kind of conversations you'll be having in your topic-specific groups. So in terms of process, I just want to reiterate what I've been responding to online. We will, and which Vicky and Giovanna have mentioned in their presentations as well. We will certainly be sharing the formal list of participants for you to see, and I recognize that there's an importance there to understand from your country, for example, who else will be participating and to be well aligned in your activities there. Of course, all of the slides and recordings from our webinars will be circulated with all of the participants of the panel, the participants of the webinars themselves, and also published on our website. We had a few questions around how to sign up for the topic-specific groups. So I've tried to respond with the direct link to everyone there, but if you have for any reason not received the invitation by mail, or if it's gone to spam, or for whatever reason it's missed your inbox, then again, just contact us directly. And I think the easiest way to do that would be to write to the rare2030@uordis.org email. Otherwise, I will also circulate the rest of the email addresses as well. And then finally, we had a few questions around, just sifting through here. Oh yeah, the membership was the last one, yeah. So I think that covers it. I'm just gonna share my screen again to let you know what are the next steps. But before that, we have Jan joining us as well, who is going to give a nice round of applause, and thank you to all of our participants, as well as a recap of the importance of this project and the impact that we hope it will have. So the floor is yours, Jan.
Thank you, Anna, and hello to everyone. We really thank you very warmly for joining this panel of experts of the Foresight Rare 2030. Thank you very much for embarking in this exercise. We do feel privileged to benefit from your insight. George Orwell said, seeing what is under our nose requires constant effort. So I guess that's what we're trying to do with this project. It's foresight is usually not about providing answers, but more about stimulating reflections about what the opportunities and risks are. But in Rare 2030, we will be much more focused, and I hope come up with some answers. During the first phase, which is now in 2019 and through early 2020, we will open our mind, and we invite you to really open your minds to identify these trends and specific which have an impact. Either it's a small sign for the moment, but can have a strong impact later, or has already a potential strong impact in the field of rare diseases. And for that, you will use your deep knowledge of the field, but I will invite you to really open up your imagination. Imagination is knowledge, and you do have a lot of knowledge by using your intuition and being very straightforward about what you feel could be the opportunities, but also the challenges 20 years from now. I'm sure you've covered that pretty well in details in terms of methodology. Now, in the second phase, we will, as you know, not only look toward 2040, but we will go back to 2030, see what are our preferred scenarios about these potential futures, and then decline the what, the how to get to these optimal scenarios for 2030. And here, your expertise is very important too, because that obviously will take us back to issues that we have in front of our nose right now for the next 5 years, but also what are the best political options to take or actions to take in order to take us to the optimal scenarios toward 2030. And with this exercise, in itself, it's important because it will bring all the panel of experts and all the partners involved and all the parties involved on the same page of the vision of the future by 2040 and of what kind of future we're trying to promote in the next 10 years. But in addition, it will represent a robust base to develop new policy on rare diseases. We will do beyond the project 2040 as a civil society movement of patients and working with all clinicians and partners, including the partners in the national government. We'll do everything we can to promote a new policy framework, legislation possibly at the European level, but also at national level. And this time try to focus on qualitative objectives, not only on actions and infrastructures and means. To conclude, 2 points. One is that we're looking far beyond rare disease to enrich our reflection. As you know, we're looking already into the foresight that has been performed in Europe on chronic diseases. So that's a strong base, and EasyNova, our partner, has contributed, has been core in the development of this scenario. So we bring this knowledge into the project. The second one is that there is different foresight activities in the world, and one which is pretty popular, you may have seen the books about it because it's published and available on in library and bookstores. It's the trends for 2035 prepared by the 16 intelligence agency of the United States. And what you find there and what you find in some other foresights in Europe, it's all about the population aging, obviously, and the gaps between countries, which may be growing in this regard. But China joining Russia and Europe in terms of aging, when the younger populations will be more in Africa and Southeast Asia. And I think we need to have that in mind. The second is the economic growth is slowing, as we know, and it's moving from Europe and Atlantic to Pacific and Asia. So I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. Technology disruptions, what are the impact in the new activities that we can hardly imagine? If we think back 20 years ago, there is activities that exist today, which we were not imagining. and also the impact these disruptions have in terms of organization and economies. Now, we also see the political trends toward ideologies of exclusion, nationalism, religion, dogmatism, which has to be factored in our reflections, as some of the strong innovations in our area, just to mention diagnostic and prevention, preconception, but also access to medicines, there is a lot of ethical aspects, and we are obviously embedded into the values of the societies where we operate. But the last thing is that there is a lot of reflection also about how this globalization is also a globalization of civil society, of professionals, a globalization of knowledge and of data, but a globalization of risks and disruptions again. So we need to bring that into our overall reflection. And the change also of power, the new ways of policy making. We're part of a World Economic Forum, Council of Precision Medicines, and what part of that activity is to discuss rethinking policy making. So that may come in also. How do we shape policy making? How do you see the factors here? Who can play a bigger role and maybe beyond member states or regional level? And to do that, in the initial step, you will have to dispel a lot of the misconceptions and fake news, if I may, particularly when it comes to treatments and to possible futures for people with rare disease based on the current knowledge. The last bit is that we put that into a global context. As you know, we go from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 2030 and all the declinations of more specific SDGs, which are also factored in thinking what kind of future we want to shape by 2030. And we're using any report and source in the United States or elsewhere for knowledge base. There is different reports published by Academy of Science in the US, but also specifically on newborn screening, for instance. There is groups on gene editing in the US, but also at WHO now. And different studies on medicines and the trends here, particularly on orphan drugs and rare disease therapies. So all that will be obviously used into, and also the panel of experts has been open to experts outside Europe, including from United States, Canada, and different parts of the world, obviously in small numbers, but still we hope to bring this perspective into our reflection. So I stop here and I thank you again very much. And I hope you will also enjoy in doing that exercise and be happy about the outcomes at the end, and will use it in our respective areas. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Jan, for that message and for reminding everyone the creative nature of this project, in addition to obviously how impactful it will be as well. So I think that's very, very inspiring. Thank you. I'm just going to end really with a practical note, if I can get there, on where you can find more information on the project if needed. So beginning with our newsletter article that describes it in a more qualitative way. We have a website, we have a Twitter account, we have a Facebook group now. We are recording all of our webinars, which hopefully have made their way to you. And if they haven't, please ask us and we'll do so. And a dedicated website, rare2030@eurytis.org. So all of my panelists are available to access that if you have any specific questions. And in any general inquiries, of course, you can reach me there as well. And finally, just to give you an idea of the next steps, which Vicky obviously did in a much better way in her presentation, but just to recap, we will be, first of all, sending you an evaluation form for this webinar, just to get your feedback on whether it was informative, whether it was complete, whether there's any lack of clarity on any of the steps in the next few months and in the project logic in general. I did share the link for how to sign up for the topic working groups, sorry, in the chat. But again, if you need that, it seems to be a number of you who haven't managed to get those in your inbox. As Vicky mentioned in her presentation, you'll be soon getting doodle forms to confirm or to come together to a consensus on the best dates to arrange those first 2 calls before we meet in Brussels on the 7th of November, where I think we're all very excited to see what kind of trends we come up with as a community and how we prioritize them, and therefore spend the afternoon in a very interactive way, starting to shape the potential future scenarios based on those trends. So I think with that, I can end the call. Thank you again. Just for your information, I think we had 82 participants, so that's a large chunk of the panel. Thank you all for taking the time to join, and please feel free to circulate the recorded webinar with any of your constituents, and we look forward to working with you very soon. Take care, everyone.